let's get to a portion of 1984, which is and this book it's so amazing because it's broken up into different parts that each of which have um incredible like velocity and like terror, and the part I wanted to talk about today is we is chapter, I guess it's 21, where Winston is interrogated by O'Brien.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've read any history about how interrogations worked in the Soviet Union, if you've read, for instance, like Robert Conquest's book, The Great Terror, or Solzhenitsyn, or any of these stories, you'll find some things that are familiar, but some things that are different as well. It's really it's about getting Winston to confess, but
much more than that.
Much more than that. This is like the horrible version of the ending of Catch-22, where the demand is that he like them, right? And yes, it's the one thing that he's not capable of doing, which is be in his heart saying like, "I love the army," right? But that's what they need from him. Walter, do you have any sort of general thoughts about this part of the story? First of all,
first, that it's incredibly influential. That the torture and interrogation and confession scenes in 1984, published in 1948 or 49, resound through culture ever since as the very template for the breaking of the human spirit. Yeah, we see it in movies like Clockwork Orange. We even see it in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Across the board, this is the gold standard for terrorizing the human mind and soul. This sequence in 1984, and let's set it up. Winston has just read the Forbidden Book by Goldstein, The Theory and Practice of Oligarchical Collectivism, in which he's sort of seen a complete critique of the society in which he lives, and an account of why it's so brutal and why it's so terrible. He has another assignation with his girlfriend, Julia, and busting into the room come the thought police. As he has expected the entire book, as he has dreamed will happen, as he has imagined will happen, here they are.
And we expected it too, by the way.
And we expected it too, by the way. Because, there's an odd mysticism to 1984. It seems to be a book about predestination in some ways. Winston literally knows the entire book how it's going to end. He even has a dream about going to a place where there is no darkness, and which totally describes the basement torture chambers of the Ministry of Love, where he ends up. So he's taken away, and he goes through a series of dehumanizing abuses that start with actual beatings so prolific and prolonged that he loses track of time. He loses track of his own body. He's starved, malnourished. At the point
cold, hot, everything.
Cold, hot, everything. He's just broken in the way we always imagine torture works, where time is suddenly unreal. You don't know whether it's day or night. The imprisonment and the pain drive the human being to a kind of fetal, withdrawn, primal catatonia. But it doesn't end there. That's really just the preparation. In comes O'Brien, his designated persecutor, teacher, and says, "We're not here to break your spirit. We're not here to torture you and cause you pain. We're here to rebuild you. We're here to erase you and reprogram you." And the famous 2 plus 2 equals 5 equation is introduced here, in which earlier Winston has said the freedom equals the ability to say 2 plus 2 equals 4. In other words, freedom is the ability to remember and refer to objective truths. But O'Brien insists that 2 plus 2 equals 5, and he doesn't want him to just say it. He has got to believe it.
Exactly.
And he keeps holding up his fingers, 2 fingers on each hand, and saying, how many is that? 4. He literally wants him to see, to hallucinate 5 fingers. And until he genuinely, sincerely sees 5 fingers, this will not stop. And that's what's terrifying about 1984 compared to other books. It's not just about pain. It's about being replaced as a self, being erased, being reprogrammed with sincere beliefs, ones that you will experience as your own. It's about removing that part of you which would even be aware you're lying.
Which is very hard to do with somebody who's already grown, has consciousness,
Right.
political beliefs, all these things, right? And there's 2 parts of this interrogation that I had forgotten when I reread them, just jumped out at me. There's a moment where Winston is thinking as O'Brien is giving him a party spiel about the reason for why the party does what it does, and Winston is thinking, oh my God, I've heard this a million times before. Like, let's fast forward. And they ask him a question, or O'Brien asks him a question, and Winston answers sort of sincerely. The question is like, why do you think we do what we do? And Winston says, you are ruling over us for our own good, he said feebly. You believe that human beings are not fit to govern themselves, and therefore he's cut off. Then it reads, he started and almost cried out. A pang of pain had shot through his body. O'Brien had pushed the lever of the dial up to 35. So when he says this, they increase the pain level.
Right. O'Brien, like an evil therapist, is sort of sitting off to the side as Winston lies prone, and he has a needle in his arm, and he's able to administer shocks or pain from 0 to 100.
Yep. And then O'Brien lets the pain, lets it subside, and he said, well, first says, that was stupid, Winston, stupid. You should know better than to say a thing like that. He pulled the lever back and continued. Now I will tell you the answer to the question. It is this. The party seeks a power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. So in other words, it's O'Brien, even though Winston is actually answered correctly, it comes from Winston. That's the problem. And when O'Brien repeats it to him and says, now I'm going to tell you what it really is, and says exactly the same thing. We seek power entirely for its own sake, the party seeks power entirely for its own sake. The difference is that it comes not from his heart, but from the party. Like Winston still has that distinction still exists in his consciousness, and O'Brien is trying to get rid of it. Now, there's another moment that I think is more profound, because we talked last time about, is this a religion? And there's a moment where Winston looks at O'Brien, notices that his face is old and that it's drooping. And O'Brien, of course, can read his mind and says, you're thinking that I'm getting old. But there is no age with the party, right? You know the party slogan, freedom is slavery. Has it ever occurred to you that it is reversible? Slavery is freedom, alone, free. The human being is always defeated. It must be so because every human being is doomed to die, which is the greatest of all failures. But if he can make complete, utter submission, if he can escape from his identity, if he can merge himself into the party so that he is the party, then he is all powerful and immortal. So this is like a 20th century sort of Nietzschean twist on the promise of Christianity. You will have eternal life, but it's not heaven. It's not individual. It's not something you're going to experience as pleasure. It's just that you will be part of something that will live on forever.
Well, but it's actually the opposite of Nietzscheanism. Nietzsche was about assuming as an individual the powers,
I guess that's true.
formerly attributed to God. This is about total surrender. We promise immortality because we promise the abolition of the self. The group, which isn't even a group of individuals, finally, because all the individuals in it will change. Even its leaders will be, at some point, put on trial and thrown out. This thing called the party, which we realize is abstract. We realize in this chapter there's no big brother. Big Brother's a concept. He's a symbol. It's made explicit. We've always suspected it's true, but we find out absolutely that it is. That it is the worship of power itself, and not just the worship of it, but the practice of it. In other words, the party is a machine. The party is an alien being, immortal, boundaryless, without any individual parts that can be distinguished or separated from it. It is it's very close to nothingness, but with power. The party, he said, he says in O'Brien in his speech that the problem with Hitler and the problem with the Soviet communism was that they believed themselves to be temporary. They thought they were extreme measures being taken to bring about a utopia, and they would no longer be necessary once that utopia was achieved. But what Big Brotherism has realized, its great insight, is that these tactics needn't be temporary. This isn't an instrumental politics trying to get to something else. We're not on a trip with a destination. There is no destination. It's going to be brutality, power, and more power forever and ever and ever. And the illusion that there's going to be a break in it, a cessation of it, or a time when it achieves its goals, it doesn't have any goals. There is no goal. It is what it is.
And yeah, there's no deal. It's not believe and you will live. It's just this thing exists. And it's funny. It is almost like a religious belief on the part of these human beings that there is this concept of power that exists independently and will always be, can never not be, and you might as well submit. Well, you must submit to it, actually, right? I mean, that's the argument ultimately, is that is that the nature of this thing is that it extinguishes all human instinct, and so long as you're protesting, you will not have eternal life. You will be stamped out. So to live is to die, basically, right? You must accept your own end in order to be part of this thing that will live.
It's very paradoxical at first, and Orwell, I think, is mischievously aware of how much further he's taken the logic of political zealotry than any of its practitioners have so far. I mean, to Big Brother, Stalin would be a pussy and Hitler would be a wimp, because they thought they were bringing about something, the 1,000-year Reich, or, socialist man, or, something like that.
The state withering away, whatever it is. Yeah.
But for Big Brother, it's not that the means justify the ends. It's that the means are the ends. Brutality is the end. Violence is the end. But what's also super spooky, creepy, and perverse about these chapters is that you realize you're in the ministry of love. And until now, that's been a terrible irony that the torture chambers of the state are called the ministry of love. But O'Brien makes a case which gets further into your unconscious than you want it to. I mean, you're almost resisting, as a reader, his argument, because it's so terribly insidious, which is that, no, we do love you. This is love. We're liberating you from the pain and worry and anxiety of being an individual, of being a human being. We're liberating you from having the stress of having to think for yourself. We're liberating you from disappointment and expectation and all of the things that make life a little rough. Once you have become the full Big Brotherist receptacle with no memory, one thing they do that O'Brien does in this series of chapters is basically extinguish Winston's memory. Winston has a memory of seeing three-party leaders at one point in a way that isn't official history, and that's obliterated for him. But once you have no memory, once you have no desire, once you have no individuality, once you have no expectations, you're going to be free. And only someone who loves you would free you in this way.
Yeah, and there are shades of Buddhism in that, but then there's also shades of Invasion of the Body Snatchers in that, right? Like, just go to sleep, right? Like, don't be trapped by old concepts. Just lie down. It's all gonna be fine. And in the context of the book, it will be, actually. It's the only way out. Because to live right now in any other way is just to suffer, immeasurably, right? Like to absolutely the maximum conceivable level that a human being can endure. But is that worse than surrendering everything there is about being a human being, which is what the society offers you? And there's another part of this that I think is fascinating. There's this moment, and he spends a lot of time, Orwell does, on this concept, so it must be important to him. This idea that you have to set aside your 19th century ideas about the laws of nature. We make the laws of nature. We could blot out the stars if we want to, and Winston says, well, what about all the dinosaurs and, the mastodons in the ground? And he's like, they were invented by 19th century biologists. The world began with people. It will end with people. And I wonder how many people remember the Bush years when Ron Suskind, I think it was in the New Yorker, did a story, and there was an unnamed person who later turned out to be Karl Rove, who talked about how we're in the reality-based community. And it was essentially this exact same speech that the reporter was pushing back and saying, well, you can't just make people believe stuff that's not true. And Rove was saying, well, what are you talking about? We are what's true, right? And at the time, it sounded silly. But in the internet age, and with AI coming, and with the ability to completely engineer everybody's attitudes about everything, and that's something we probably couldn't have imagined back then. This is now a thing. This is now something we have to worry about, because reality is going to be, and you see it with people you talk to, like
Matt, it gave me a chill when I heard O'Brien, espousing this rhetoric, and I thought, this is Fauci saying, "I am the science."
Right.
If I say something different next week about how things work, well, that's scientific because I am the science. And the what was, seemed like at the time like an egotistical statement, after you read 1984, sounds like a philosophical statement, because what Orwell is trying to convince you of, or what O'Brien is trying to convince you of, is that we live in a completely subjective universe. And I think that people are closer to believing this than you might think. With all the talk about my lived experience versus your lived experience and all this defense of science as what experts think. I mean, we've got people like this Tom Nichols and others who, Sam Harris, who write in praise of the experts, who are precious close to telling us that reality is what experts tell you it is.
Well, yes, and this was the thing that was so horrifying intellectually, like to me, with the digital censorship stuff, is that you could see this whole concept of sort of engineering responses. They were, this whole thing about building resilience that the DHS came up with, which is almost like word for word a concept pulled from this book. In other words, we're not training you to know the objective truth about X, Y, or Z. We're training you in the habit of rejecting things that sound or feel wrong, or that feel like they depart from.
We're training you not to contradict us.
Yeah, we're training you not to contradict us. And Walter, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I certainly have in my interactions with people, with whom I've been close over the years. You'll be having a conversation with somebody, and all of a sudden, like, whole blocks of the conversation will be occupied by these sort of dead spots where people are repeating things that clearly are not their ideas, but now they sort of sincerely believe them. I just do not remember that being true.
Modules of verbiage that come out wholesale as though they, were installed with a thumb drive.
Right.
But it would have been hard to imagine literally that what O'Brien is saying might be true before AI. But now we have this AI metaphor, this to compare some of this to, and we see that it could really be the case that all thought will just run through you and come from an exterior source. And so I want to read a little bit of that. He says, anything could be true. The so-called laws of nature were nonsense. The law of gravity was nonsense. Quote, if I wished, O'Brien had said, I could float off this floor like a soap bubble. Winston worked it out. If he thinks he floats off the floor, and I simultaneously think I see him do it, then the thing happens.
Right.
And in all sorts of ways, political philosophy, especially on the left, since the 1960s, has kind of agreed that language is just an expression of power, that science itself is kind of has racial and class components, that it can't pretend to be objective. It is always it is always a creature of its users. When people talk about our democracy, it's as though they're saying democracy is what the guardians of democracy say it is. You can't find some description of it in a dictionary that supersedes me saying, this is and this isn't democracy. In other words, the mind and the collective mind are all. And and in a way, it relieves politicians of all the problems that they've had through the years, which is that they have to deliver on promises, that they have to actually get results. In the world of 1984, everyone could starve to death for the party and be perfectly happy about it, because starvation is nutrition. When you can define terms, define science, define mathematics in any way you wish, you can never fail as a political leader.
Yeah, and conversely, the individual always fails in that system, right? And
always fails, and as O'Brien points out, always fails ultimately because they die.
And I always felt like there was an undercurrent of this in a lot of the arguments against free speech. See, this is part of why I fear this other censorious instinct more than maybe some of the other violations of the First Amendment, because there's a metaphysical thing going on.
Yes, absolutely.
And
absolutely.
The metaphysics of the other one is the individualism itself is a problem, right?
It's a curse. In fact, you're suffering from it right now, Matt. Don't you know that all your problems, all your anxieties, all your worries come from trying to maintain this individual, this illusion of yourself as an individual? What from O'Brien's point of view, it's not torture he's giving Winston, but therapy. Ultimate therapy. He's relieving him of the source of all suffering, which is selfhood, and all illusion, which is selfhood. And it reminds me of those tapes. I don't know if anybody's seen them, of Jonestown.
Oh, yeah.
At the end, when Jim Jones, as hundreds and hundreds of people are filing up to drink poison and make their children drink poison, Jones is saying, "Come on, it's wonderful, it's beautiful.
Yeah, the water's great.
Do it." And he has so inverted the difference between life and death objectively that people are celebrating suicide, believing that it's liberation. And in so many ways, like you say, the censorship and the algorithmic manipulation that I fear most is that which is melting our idea of reality. It's one thing when you see people being censored because they're the enemy. Trump doesn't like these people's views on Israel, or he believes they're Islamic fundamentalists or whatever, and he's going to kick them out of the country. Okay, that's one thing.
Don't love it, but anyway, go ahead.
Nobody's loving it. Mm-hmm. But more insidious, more pervasive, more metaphysically threatening, and more nightmarish and Orwellian are those groups which say, we're going to remove your ability to have bad thoughts. We're going to we're going to cover up our mistakes and move seamlessly to new party lines without you even having awareness, or maybe even the archives that would allow you to find the change. It is my mind being changed that I worry most about, and I worry most about it being done at scale with others, because the rates at which we adapt to this therapy, or with which it succeeds in us, are really going to break society. Because some people are going to go further along in the liberation from individual thought. They're going to, every single question will be answered by Grok or GPT-5 by then, or whatever. They will have, like you say, be not just yielding up predigested chunks of verbiage and opinion. It'll be one long river of that.
Well, yeah, we've met those people too, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
And for the rest of us, we're gonna stand as reminders of another way, which is going to anger them. We're not going to want to talk to them much anymore because we've dismissed the origins of their verbiage as basically imports from an establishment or a machine that aren't worthy of consideration, except in a kind of, horrified way, as an observation of Orwellian future, of the Orwellian future. And if you're not all educated in this program at once, you're going to fall out with each other.
Yeah, and that's already happened. I mean, I think probably a lot of people who listen to this program have had the identical experience of suddenly becoming distanced and cut off from people with whom they were close pretty recently, right? And there's this, for me, there's an invasion of the body snatchers quality to this, where I'm suddenly kind of hiding my thoughts, or either that, or I just feel, increasingly alone sometimes. And I think this is a widespread phenomenon, but what I worry about is that it's going to disappear because they're going to get better at this stuff. I mean, the less, we're grounded in history and time and realize that there's a whole range of opinions and feelings and things like that, the easier it becomes to sort of smash consciousness.
You don't want to be the control group, the people who aren't taking the drug, when everybody else is taking the drug, especially if the drug for them feels urgent, necessary, and perfect, and they have committed to it such that even if it has terrible side effects, they're going to keep taking it. All you will do, if you don't and maybe thrive, is enrage them about the choice they made and now regret, and or you just become inexplicable to them. Why is Matt repeating those conspiracy theories? What's wrong with Matt? What foreign government?
What happened to you, man?
What malign entity has gotten a hold of him? Who's paying him to say these things? Exactly. What happened to you? I mean, both you and I have experienced just recently a real upsurge in what they call concern trolling, which is, I'm really worried about you, or you used to be cool. Yesterday, I saw a tweet against me which said, "Is this tweet evidence of mania or an untreated stroke?" Literally physicalizing it. Walter, I think you need to go see a neurologist for your tweets, and that causes me to want to withdraw from those people, to want to withdraw from the people who know those people, and it causes them to fear that maybe there's some contagion they might get from me, or they might get punished for knowing me. They don't want to be seen. And as I say, the rate at which this process goes forth, which will be different for everyone and for every group, is going to cause new kinds of rifts. We're used to balkanization traditionally, historically, over race, ethnicity, gender, language, religion, and so on. But we're now going to face balkanization over submission, levels of information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. And, my cure for this, ironically, has been spend less time on the internet, read more, and that's one of the reasons I think we do this show.
And why should and mine too. And why should reading be a remedy for this kind of cognitive balkanization, I'll call it? Because by reading, you go back to a book, especially books that were written at least a few decades ago or more. You go back and you are able to be with peers in a way. You're able to feel a sense of community, an intellectual community that you can't get now. In other words, it's a less fractured existence, a less fractured reality, because the book has created its own, in a way, community of minds, and there are commentaries on the book, and it was also written at a time when this balkanization was less advanced, and you do really find refuge.
You do, and I mean, I remember this when I was a kid. The feeling, if you were one of those kids like I was who, had trouble at school, wasn't popular, or like, if you were bullied, if you were any of those folks.
You're so big. How did they bully you?
Well, I wasn't big until a certain point, and then it became a. Anyway,
then
I won't get into that.
Kicking those puny ass bitches.
Yeah, but I had a hard time when I was a kid for a variety of reasons, and I remember having this thought that, wow, like, there are these people who are long dead, who I seem to be closer to than anybody that I meet all the time, in my regular daily life. And but also, what's important about books is that it forces your mind to do things that in a society that is sort of anti-thought, those muscles are kind of turned off, right? You have to construct images. You have to feel other people's feelings. You have to do all these things that doesn't do it for you. It doesn't show it to you. And, the weaker that muscle gets in your head, the easier it is to kind of stamp out your individuality. And books force you to get back in shape spiritually a little bit. And
they do.
And so it's a beautiful thing still, but
also for a book to work, except for radical experimental books that are determined to be incoherent and jagged and internally contradictory. But for most books to work, they have to present an internally coherent universe. Okay, and it's just like going on vacation to immerse yourself in a coherent universe, even if it's a nightmare like 1984, because the much worse nightmare than being in a coherent Airstrip 1 Oceania world of 1984 of nightmarish political oppression is to live in a world of absolutely splintered, uncertain, and unstable, endless surprise, contradiction, and disappointment, and social incompatibility,
paradox, all those things. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It's like going to a small town, 1984. It may be the most nightmarish small town ever built by man's mind, but at least you feel after you've started reading it that you know how it works and what its rules are and who the people are and little of what to expect.
Absolutely. Yeah. So nightmarish as this is, it's still a respite in some ways. So, but horrifying part of the book, still relevant. Anyway, thank you, Walter, and we'll check in with everybody next week, and we'll see what happens over the weekend. It should be interesting to watch.